All right. So last week we're looking at progressing through the timeline of the lifespan, and we dealt with emerging adulthood and young adulthood last week, and we just talked about some of the challenges that we encounter through the lifespan of an individual, and those could be physical demands, those could be cognitive issues, or most popular, we might see social issues or even mental health issues that can occur. And that stays pretty consistent through, again, the lifespan of that individual that might be enduring certain types of stress or whatever. But what we see is this progression, and we're going to kind of delve into that today, as in terms of what does it mean when somebody has certain cognitive disabilities or emotional development that they haven't really gone through. We can see that transpire and really trickle down into later periods of their lives. So, and we're going to see a little bit of that this week when we talk about this. So what I'm going to focus on today is just kind of talking to you a little bit about what middle adulthood looks like. What are some of the challenges that we face? And then later on in the week, on Wednesday, we'll kind of delve a little bit more into that and work with scenario to kind of help individuals, because many of you are going to be in helping industries where you're going to be helping people negotiate certain physical issues or emotional issues or mental health issues or whatever that may be. All right, so with that, I'm going to share my slide with you. All right. So hopefully all of you can see my slide there. So what I'd like to do to start this is, if you would in the chat, just go ahead and enter, if you could time travel or go back in time to like a specific age or an age range of your life, what would you choose to revisit? Or even if you can go to the future and do that, what would be most ideal to you? And well, just enter your age, and then I'll maybe call on a couple of you to see what your thought process was as to why you selected that. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So got quite the age range here. So a lot of you look like you would go back to like your teenage years. Mary, you selected 50. So what was the thought process? Does anybody care to share why the teenage years?
I would want to go back to my teenage years just so I can, knowing now what I didn't know then, just so I can experience my teenage years with the knowledge I have now.
Okay. So kind of lessons learned. Maybe some people would set themselves up for better success, whatever that means for them. I can get behind that. And then some of you would choose to erase your younger years, right? Or maybe go back and negotiate them differently. Mary, you picked 50. I'm curious as to what your reasoning was behind that.
Don't get me wrong, I would definitely like to visit my earlier age, because who wouldn't? But I don't know, I would like to see what my future would hold, and the age I am now, if I needed to like change my habits, I guess is how I thought about it.
Okay. So with the understanding, maybe you could come back to whatever age you are now and then work forward towards better life or quality of life or whatever that means. Okay. All right. Well, interesting. So I always like to ask this question because it really gets people thinking about, what some of their shortcomings might have been, or what maybe some of their successes might have been in the past that contribute to where they are today, or in Mary's case, moving forward. What can I do differently today to move forward and produce a higher quality of life? So anyway, just something to kind of get your creative juices flowing and thinking about what you would do differently, right? But during middle adulthood, there are really a lot of social and emotional and even personality changes that are affected by the growing age of their children, and also maybe even some deteriorating health that could be seen often by like parents of those individuals, right? So we're kind of right in that middle in between phase there. So in order for us to really provide assistance to generations that came before us and those that came after us, we need to really have successfully completed the generative versus stagnation stage, which we covered when we talked about Erickson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. But according to Erickson, we can only really give back to those that came after us if we found a sense of intimacy. You know, we have going back to that identity versus role confusion, have established a stable identity as to who we are and where we're going, what we're doing. So in order for us to be able to give back to those and to be able to provide, we really need to have a sense of belonging and that sense of being part of society. And this is really related to mental health among middle-aged adults, and it's often associated with the satisfaction and all the assets and facets and all those good things of our lives. Just off the top of your head, what do you think are some of the most common issues with middle adulthood, like mental health wise? What would you say?
Is burnout considered mental health?
Yeah, burnout. What do you mean by burnout? Specifically,
Just like you've been in your career, in your job for so long, and you're just kind of going through the motions every day. You're just
okay.
you lack the motivation to do anything, to change anything about yourself or your life. You're just like, I don't want to say in a state of stasis,
Mhm.
because like burnout is more than that, but you're just kind of in a state of unmotivated paralysis.
Okay. So kind of just the inability to make change. And we'll talk about that actually in a little bit, because we do have a working definition.
Well, I can say depression,
Mhm.
depression, anxiety. For example, my mom, she's 83,
Mhm.
but the technology, now everything is by internet. You have to apply by internet. You have to know the computer. And for her, she was getting depression because she feel like she is not worth enough to keep going, you know. And she say, I'm not able to do anything. I don't understand this new generation. And that was putting her in a depression. And I say, everything is knowledge. You can learn whatever you want. By age of 75, you was taking English to understand my kid. Why you don't go and get a class and you will see how easy it is. And then she is there.
Yeah. So we see some technological, I don't want to say stagnation, but difficulty wrapping our minds around that technology, right? Because we
Yes, for that generation,
yeah. And I can say I am probably right around. I'm starting to get a little stagnant in advancing my technological. I do awesome stuff with the computers, but the generation that's really in my classes right now, they're dealing with technology that I've never even heard of or dealt with. We've got TikTok and Twitter and you name it, just 100 ways to connect with each other. And I haven't really grasped the concept of on it. So we do find a little bit of stagnation as we get a little bit older, not because we're not necessarily motivated to learning that stuff unless we have a reason to, but more along the lines is that we just try and develop these routines and we just get used to one thing, and it's exhausting to make changes. And as Liana said, maybe burnout is part of that. Maybe we just get exhausted from wanting to learn new technology all the time, right? Because it does take quite a bit to shift. So anyway, yeah, so those are some pretty common things that we see with middle adulthood in terms of depression and burnout and exhaustion, those sort of things. But how we negotiate that, again, that kind of adds to, well, are we going to try and give back to the generation that comes after us, or are we just going to kind of seclude ourselves and kind of take pity on ourselves and not do much with our lives beyond that point? So we really start to see that take form in middle adulthood, okay, the generativity versus stagnation, okay? So let's talk about midlife crisis. What do you know about midlife crises? What are they? What do they look like?
I'm living one.
You're living one. Okay. If you don't mind me asking, how do you feel like you're living one?
Because, well, in my case is health. And I'm in the middle of, I have to help older people and take care of myself, my house, everything. So
Okay.
I'm in the middle of a storm, you know, and two of them, yes, it passed away, but the other two right now, I'm helping another aunt. And from diverticulitis went to shingles. And shingles, both of them is very painful. And then I was helping her. So the next day I wake up that I cannot move from my hips down bottom. And it's one thing or the other, one thing or the other. It's one step forward, 10 back. One forward, 10 back. And I feel like I never get out of this crisis. This moment, everything is bad.
Okay. So what
and
we're
I try to did things according to the therapist and stuff, but it's hard. It's very hard to, and this day when people depend on you.
Well, and I hear what you're saying, and that and it sounds like your definition of crises is these bad events that are happening. But when we look at midlife crisis, we usually what we're looking at is, maybe these bad things, these bad events happen. But what it usually means is some kind of weird. I think we have a stereotypical stigma associated with midlife crisis. Like, what would be? Does anybody else have like an example of a midlife crisis, something that they may have seen, like characteristics in an individual?
Maybe like your stereotypical, like a middle-aged man gets like the fancy car. If they're unhappy in their marriage, they get a car and a younger girlfriend.
Yeah, exactly. They try and relive their youth sometimes, right? So we kind of look at this as whether or not it's a fact or fiction. And and I gotta say, I mean, I don't know anybody that had a stable identity or good morals that ever really did anything like that. It really depends on the personality. I can't say within my practice or any research that I've seen that there's any really evidence that somebody that has these stable things in their lives go to that dark side, go and relive their youth. Usually there's some kind of mental health issue that has been taking place prior to them acting that way. But for the purpose of this lesson and this week's assignments, we look at midlife crisis as one of those things that really is stereotypically looked at in middle adulthood. But what we mean by midlife crisis is often really been debated as to whether or not it exists, or if it's something that is just fiction, or it might just be an excuse for somebody to act a fool or go out and do something crazy, right? So it's believed to be brought about by a constellation of difficult paths that are often presented in midlife. And this is the point at which we have to really begin to accept our own mortality. And that's kind of what we think of when we think of midlife crisis, as somebody's realizing that they're facing inevitable death. You know, their days ahead are probably fewer than the days behind them. But prior to this stage, we often see that young people and adolescents, they look at death as part of life, but it's so far from us at that age that, you know, we now get to this midlife and we realize that we're actually close, and we've never really been able to really begin to realize that maybe we haven't completed a lot of things we wanted to, right? How many of you have bucket lists, things that you would like to do? You know I do. There's a lot of things I would enjoy doing before, you know, I'm no longer here. But we start looking at that list a little bit more, intensely, I guess, you know, and a lot of those tasks that we want to do, we just have that sense of wanting to complete things, and that kind of might lead to somebody to a crisis, you know, recognizing maybe they don't have the physical limitation or the physical abilities they used to. They might be limited by injuries or disease or brittle bones or whatever, because we do see that in this middle age that our physical abilities tend to decline, in some cases significantly. So at this age, it's kind of a quick reminder of that. And also really the adaptation to major changes in our roles, because we see a lot of shifting at that age too. That might also lead us to spreading ourselves too thin. You know, Josie, you were talking about that. And that could bring about a sense of anxiety and stress. So the crisis, they're really typically triggered by maybe a specific event. So they might be the loss of a job, the death of a close friend or a relative, difficulties within a marriage, or maybe even with their children, because most people at this age still have children. You know, and some of them have young children, some of them have old children. You know, kind of weird to say all my children are grown up and out of the house now, but this can often make individuals feel overwhelmed, and sometimes really in an attempt to ease that up or ease up that burden, it might be an attempt to escape reality in some way. And sometimes that's done through what we've seen in trading in that minivan for a Corvette or a motorcycle, or I think, who was it? I think somebody mentioned, you know, running off with somebody much younger. You know, we might see infidelities occur at this age, or various other things. So we find that people with history of depression are likely to face these midlife crises a little bit more negatively than those who do not. All right. So within the changes within the relationship and personalities, we do see marital stability and satisfaction for the most part. It should increase in midlife, right? We should see more stability. We should see more satisfaction. But we find that this is not just because of the age, but often because by this point, the married couple would probably have an increase in number of shared friends, right? Because we look at that, right? And as a clinician, when I'm looking at an individual, I look at their support system. I look at the friends that are around them, organizations that they might be involved in, or programs they might be involved in, right? It could be church, it could be a book club or something, or just even meeting maybe on a bowling league or something. But looking at those shared friends, and that would allow for contributing to the greater satisfaction. A good and healthy social circle, that would be adequate to helping with problem solving strategies, right? So if you think about that, what if you're having an issue with a significant other or spouse or parents or whatever, usually who's the first person you go to? Probably your friends, right? Because we trust them. That's why they're our friends. We can come to them with certain issues. But it really contributes to that sense that we have some form of control over our intimate relationships, because they know that even though, you know, couples fight, it's not going to be the end of the world as they may have thought previously in earlier stages of their relationship. So just to kind of realize that that's just part of living, and they know how to solve it because they've done it before. So we often find that middle-aged women are better able to cope with divorce than younger men. And we find that this again can be due to experience that is brought about or facilitated through life and through dealings with their husbands or significant others or others, maybe even just their friends. So, and one of the things I don't like about this research that we have, it's a little bit dated because we are seeing dynamics changing within relationships. We are seeing same gender relationships, and we're still trying to wrap our minds around how those are impacted through midlife, because this is just something that's kind of been around the bend just in the past decade or two. So, a lot of research is to be done to see, what roles or what personalities within same gender or non-binary relationships or pansexual relationships might affect or might be affected through this midlife stage. Okay. So looking at the empty nest syndrome, this is a time during which people can be parents in their midlife. Typically, they can experience a sense of, or when they stop being parents, they experience a sense of depression and anxiety, and possibly even heightens their chance of divorce. And I typically see this dynamic shift. I see a personality shift. I see a person's purpose shift when their children are no longer part of the home and they're not reliant upon them, because we adopt those roles, right? As a parent or as a caregiver, as a father or mother, whatever you want to call it. We adopt those roles. And when those roles are no longer necessary, we have to find new meaning. And this is when children, they often leave the home either because of college, they get married, or they just simply move out. Now, if parenting and family life was done well during the previous stages, then they did not neglect their roles, really. They, as husbands or wives or mothers or fathers or whatever, caregiver you want to call yourselves, but they really devoted their entirely, most of their life being that parent or being that role. And now the child is gone. It could present a sense of confusion that often brings about, again, anxiety and depression. Now, the majority of women are happy when they reach this milestone and that identify as mothers, because again, they feel that they could reconnect with their spouse in different ways. However, that's not always the case. In 1970, about 8% of 25-year-olds in the United States live with their parents. Okay. What do you think that number has done? You think that number has gone up since then? Since the 1970s, 8% of 25?
I think it's gone up even since the 2010s, because the economy has changed so much and like the pandemic affected it so much that it definitely has skyrocketed. Like I know my parents were empty nesters for all of 9 months until COVID got really bad. And then my twin and I had to come home.
Yeah. And as you can see in this slide here, in 2010, they had twice more than the double of the same age, right? That lived with their parents. So we don't have stable data for 2020 because we look at usually the census as a milestone, as a way to gauge the living situation. How many people are living in a household and what ages are they? We don't necessarily have that data in, but we could probably guess that 2020 was a big year. I would say we probably even saw double, if not more, than 2010. And again, those numbers could be very, very skewed because of the pandemic, but we could probably estimate that we've seen a significant climb in that. I would say really one of the things that when I'm talking with young folks that are still living at home, this was really kind of a trend prior to 2020. We're seeing less students, or we're seeing less high school students aggressively going into education. They're starting to think a little bit more frugality and maybe even considering other options other than spending. And right now, I think there's a stigma attached with education, is that it costs too much. It's not worth going into debt over when they could be making $15 an hour at Target instead of $20 an hour, $5 an hour more, and having $50,000, $100,000 of debt to get to that $5 mark. So they're starting to ask those questions, which might be a little bit difficult as far as gauging when the appropriate time is for them to leave the home. Okay. All right. So we're also finding there are different levels of responsibility at this age, as we've seen by emerging adulthood. There's also something called the midlife squeeze, and this is where individuals who are in the middle or in the middle adulthood, they're in between like the deteriorating health of the elderly parents. I know, Josie, you kind of spoke to this a little bit, and also the pressure of children, right? So they might be demanding attention or also their time. And we kind of, for many reasons, children require things. They require being a caregiver. They might require a ride somewhere if they're not old enough to drive, or some kind of attention in general. So we have these warring factors, factions trying to divide a person's time. And that might be difficult for some people. So what we see is these multi-generational caregivers are adults who they provide assistance to their elderly parents and to their adult children at the same time, right? Then we find that, again, children sometimes live at home with parents, right? We're seeing an increase in that. And despite it may be already having too much time devoted in a career, this might present some time because we're not really at that age of retirement yet. So on top of caring for parents, the physical ailments of parents, and caring for kids, and trying to stay afloat with our careers, that's going to create a lot of warring factions, a little kind of a tug of war match on the person's time and energy. And this may present some type of burden on that individual. The poor health habits, they're often due to challenges that are presented in financial burdens, right? So the more stress we have, maybe we're not taking care of ourselves very well. So our physical health kind of declines through these warring factions, right? And the emotional responsibilities, and sometimes because of multiple responsibilities outside of the home, it may be difficult for the person to really get home and enjoy their time with their significant other, their spouse, or even their kids, right? And we do know that stress does lead to failing immune systems, or at least degraded immune systems, which leaves us open to all sorts of infections, bacteria, and all kind of nasty things that we don't want to contract, right? So I would just something to consider there with the physical realm of health. Okay. What we're seeing, and I don't know, I'm a little mixed on the numbers that we have here, because and again, I mean, we don't have the census available yet, but the census results available, but we are seeing an increase really of grandparenting. And maybe not necessarily in the numbers, but definitely, probably around the age. It's getting a little bit younger. But grandparenting is often started in middle adulthood for most people. Okay, and about 1/3 of adults, they become grandparents by their late 40s, and that's not uncommon. And we find that about 92% of them express high levels of satisfaction with this roles. But we find that not all grandparents are really, when we think of grandparents, what do we think of when we think of your grandparents? What are some stereotypical grandparent traits that we might consider?
They always try to feed you.
Okay. Yeah, they're always cooking, right? Making some kind of cookies or pasta or something like that. My grandmother's thing is, you're looking too thin. You're looking too thin. Every time I came over, I mean, I ate just about everything in her house. But she would try and feed you more spaghetti or something. She was Italian. So yeah, it was they always like to cook, right? That's an image we conjure up in our head. There maybe, I'm thinking of typical grandmothers probably knitting a sweater or a hat or something like that, right? In their rocking chair, right? But those are our stereotypical images that we have on grandparents. We think of them being warm and caring. And at this middle age, that might be the case, but usually they're not retired and sitting in a rocking chair and knitting. They may actually still be working towards retirement, or even still have kids in their home of their own. That's not uncommon. So sometimes we find that people become grandparents at this age are often kind of cold and distant. And again, we look at the time constraint, we look at the tug of war match that's going on with their time and their energy. And really, then this is really believed to be due to the fact that they're still working and they don't have time for baking cookies or hosting guests or anything like that. But others have really also suggested, with the fear of aging grandparents, they may be reluctant to accept this role in life. Kind of going back to that midlife crisis idea, that theory that maybe being thrown into this role might be a little bit too much. Now they have to face their mortality, or face that they're getting older, or that they might have physical limitations, and looking at that end of life situation, which we'll talk about next week. So during midlife career issues, they're likely to be I guess slightly different. And we find that, we talked about burnout earlier. I forget who, I think Liana or Mary, can't remember who mentioned burnout, but we find that burnout, it's the lack of energy from exhaustion. And it's typically seen in younger adults. But we find that experience that has come from earlier stages now allows us to pace ourselves a little bit better. We find that we may not be as preoccupied with promotions and with life expectations or role expectations in our jobs. Nonetheless, we do find some gender differences whenever burnout does occur. For example, when men are not treated fairly sometimes in the workplace, they have a tendency to talk, to negotiate, and to address the issue, whereas the women that are going through these midlife career issues, they're more likely to withdraw and sometimes complain collectively with other coworkers, but not necessarily generating a change to this. And it's really important for us to understand this, as it can impact productivity in the workplace, but also as spouses or as sons and daughters of employees that are in midlife. We need to understand that the way they're addressing and handling their career might be probably very different than the way that they actually are. And I will like to make a note on this slide here is, we do see gender differences, but we're also seeing these role expectations, these gender role expectations, to be shifting slightly. We are seeing men that are probably less assertive, or people that identify as males as less assertive, or somebody that's non-binary might have both of these traits as being either assertive or not assertive and making these changes, right? So with the blending of gender role expectations, we are seeing a little bit of variation in this in current times. Okay. When I look at this slide, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with an early adult client going through the earlier adult phases. And she had a working mom, and there were 3 teenagers still in the home. And she really wished that her mom was a lot more aggressive in terms of, well, I guess not aggressive, I guess assertive. I think of aggressiveness, I think somebody that's acting violently, but she wanted her to act a little bit more assertive in terms of what to request at work. Now, my client was a young person, and she was very outspoken about things, and she was very driven, whereas her mom was completely different. She was a little bit more I guess just kind of took it on the chin on a boxing match, right? Took her punches and just went with it. She didn't really stand up for herself. And what I saw was a lot of resentment from between the client and the mother, because the client was always trying to give her advice, dispense wisdom, and trying to insert herself in her problem solving situation. And the mom wasn't wanting that, or she didn't want to do it that way. So anyway, I saw a lot of conflict arise out of this, because the younger adult tried to influence mom when mom wasn't ready to be influenced. So we may attribute this to a cultural point. We could also address the age differences, right? Or even personality differences, because again, what the younger client would do is not what the mom was doing, right? So that might have been a generational or personality difference. And really only time would tell whether the client was going to take more passive approach in her own life, or maybe learn the lessons from mom and decide that she didn't want to be that passive about it. Okay. All right, so in addition to our midlife career issues, we can see that unemployment at this point, and at any point really, it's difficult, but it seems to be more difficult during middle age. Why do you think that is?
Because they've been in their career for so long that unemployment is really difficult for them to have that change and to change that part of their identity, because at that point they've been, like I said, in their career for so long, and maybe they've gotten a degree in that, and then middle adulthood strikes and maybe they are feeling that burnout. And so they essentially, if they lose that job, they lose that part of their identity, and they've been so keyed in and attached to that identity and in that identity for so long that it feels like it's taking the keystone out of their overall identity, and it just crumbles.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, looking at that role and those changes, changes stress at any age, but when you're going through middle adulthood, you're experiencing a lot of changes. Again, looking at our parents getting older, looking at our kids leaving home, and now we're finding purpose in what we do in our work, and that's taken away. So the amount of stress that we can take is unimaginable, but it takes its toll on us, and some people deal with it in very different ways. But the reason why we might experience a little bit more difficulty in this age is sometimes there's a sense of competition. We look at ageism, right? There's competition seen with younger employees. Now, at this age, they might have to compete with people that may have newly acquired skills, like computer skills or FaceTiming skills or gaming skills, whatever it might be. And we might also have to overcome ageism, which is a form of discrimination based on age. Now, I know that that's illegal, but we can't stop. And there's no real objective way of controlling ageism, because you can get a general sense of how old a person is, not necessarily based on, they can't ask you what your age is on an application or your date of birth, but they can request that you put on your resume your work experience. And your work experience might give an indication of how old you are, right? So ageism, unfortunately, still occurs in some form or another. But the heightened sense of anxiety and depression that sets on us, coming from that, might be immense sometimes, especially at this age, at this stage in life. And we also find that there's a higher risk of physical illness after a job loss that is seen in middle adults, which will also have an impact on family relationships. We find that typically men experience depression and really loss of self-esteem. And as a result of that, the marital relationship can deteriorate also. So what is interesting is that as soon as a person is reemployed, all of these difficult issues and health concerns and lack of emotional stability, they tend to really get back on track with that individual. So definitely arguing as to how we've become accustomed to the lifestyle, or perhaps not only financial, but also a routine within our careers, it comes that sense of responsibility, and having that responsibility pulled from us, that really can wreak havoc on a person's psyche. Okay. All right, so let's look at preparing for retirement, because that's kind of what we think about when we get to this age, right? Some people a little bit younger. I was talking to one of my troops when I was in the Air Force. We were both about I think we were about 19, 20 together, and he started aggressively investing in the stock markets. I mean, a good portion of his paycheck, because we would go out partying and go out skiing and do whatever else just to enjoy ourselves. And he wouldn't go with us because he didn't have the money. He was putting all of his money into the stock markets and savings plans, which sounded great. And I don't know how well, I unfortunately haven't kept up with this individual to find out how he's doing these days, but I would imagine he's probably doing better off than most of us that were not nearly. But and there's that balance. How do you strike living your youth and not really not being aesthetic about it, not being what's the word I'm looking for, stingy, and not enjoying the things that people your age should do, right? So anyway, there's that fine balance, I think. But yeah, I think somebody that goes to the extreme, I think of him, because he didn't really go out and have a good time. He didn't enjoy his time. He seemed like he was always stressed. So is that worth it? Is that worth the trade-off? That could be a topic for debate for many, many generations. But as many of us are already doing, we love thinking about the future, and it's important that we prepare for retirement, right? And this kind of comes into fruition around this age. And according to some statistics and research that was conducted in right around 2019, we have different kind of categories we look at for people that prepare for retirement. We look at wealth builders. We have anxious idealists. We have empowered trailblazers. I love that one. I think it's my favorite one. We have the stretched and stressed boomers. And then we have our leisure lifers. And you can see the different percentages of the people that are here now, at least on this survey that was done. And the wealth builders are those who plan to spend really much of their time building upon their already accumulated wealth after retirement. So they will continue to invest, they'll continue to make more money, and to a certain extent, they're not necessarily going to retire anytime soon. They just want to continue making money thereafter. And that could be for various reasons. They may stop their current occupation, but they'll continue working in different ways. I know a lot of people that do that. They may step away from their jobs and collect their 401ks or their pensions or whatever, and then also work at Lowe's as a greeter or something like that, part-time or even full-time. So there are various ways that people might go into this, but for wealth builders, we do see them continuing to make money, and that could be for they may just not want to be bored. Maybe they enjoy working or interacting with people, or maybe as we get down to the stretched and stressed boomers, maybe they just want to ensure that their way of life is secure. They want to keep that bigger house with that bigger mortgage. And in order to do so, they're going to have to make up the money to do that. They're not ready to really downsize, which we oftentimes see people do in retirement. But moving down to the next type of retiree we see is the anxious idealists. And these are people who plan to really volunteer work. They donate money to charity, but they're often unable to because of their limited income. So that we see that's about 20% of the population we're looking at here. Empowered trailblazers are those who plan on traveling. They like taking classes, continuing to work, but in volunteering, right? I do see this in a good amount of people that are at the retirement age, and they're not necessarily interested in making any more money, but they just want to, again, kind of keep busy and enjoy their time, but at the same time, keep their minds occupied. Then we have the stretched and stressed boomers. And these are people who are in deep financial trouble. And unfortunately, this is, it's about 18% of the population that were polled. And these individuals, they're worried about the future because they didn't plan accordingly, right? And those are really the ones that I tend to see usually in clinical settings, either in outpatient or inpatient settings, because they don't know how to balance that. They don't know how to deal with the stress of getting through whatever financial burdens that they're experiencing. Okay, and lastly, we have our leisure lifers, and this population of people, they plan to spend most of their time engaging in recreational pursuits, and they're geared towards retirement in their early to mid 50s. Okay, which sounds great. And I know quite a few people that have been able to achieve this, but at great cost usually, or at least great expense. They might have to make investments early, or maybe they got lucky or skilled in playing the stock market or some kind of other savings plan that were able to allow them to do this. Now, for individuals who rarely ever kind of make that happen, we often find that they may start in that way, but a majority of those people, they get into retirement, and rarely does this ever happen in the 50s. And some people report that after retiring at that age, that there are a series of challenges that are presented, not only because of tax reasons, as we find retirement packages are designed to last over a period of time, right? So when we think of retirement age, we think of right around what? 60s, mid to or early to mid 60s usually. So retirement packages that somebody might have gotten into earlier on in life, if they start earlier, that money's only going to last for so long. So that might be a problem they're facing when they're 70, 80, or 90 years old. If they live that long, that might be a problem, right? But also because of the relationship that will be occurring between the couple once, at that age, they might have different needs or health issues, or one of them is facing health issues, and money might be a problem. Okay, so there are a couple of reasons why leisure lifers, while it sounds attractive, very few people get there, and even fewer people stay there, just because of the necessity to work. All right. So what I'd like to do in our remaining time is, if you could, I'm going to break you off into groups 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll have 3 groups. Some of you will have 2, some of you will have 3. But I'm going to break you off into groups and go into D2L and under week 12 resources. If you can look at week 12 resources and find there's a, let me see if I can find it. There's a document at the bottom that I put in there today. Lost too many screens open. Can't tell where anything is. It's called Right Age. Okay. And I'll share my screen with you so you can see what this looks like. Make sure you got the right one. So go into D2L right now and bring this up. And it looks like this. Okay. So what I'd like you to do with your group is come up with an age, not necessarily a reason, but just an age that you think, for example, what is the best age for a man to marry? What is the best age for a woman to marry? Or non-binary, you don't necessarily have to answer those or change those terms up, because we are going to see increase in that, or maybe even marriage isn't necessarily a thing that needs to happen. But anyway, do your best to answer this, because I do want to kind of see what the answer is, what the trend is, and then show you what the trend has been over the past couple decades. All right, any questions on the activity we're doing?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are we putting it down or writing it out? I don't understand. Maybe I just discussing it.
Yeah. If you want to write it down or whatever within your group, and then we'll just talk about it at the end. So yeah, you don't have to submit anything or anything like that. You're just going through and answering these questions, and then we'll get back together as a group to talk about it. Sound good?
Okay.
All right. Let me set you up. We'll have 3 breakout rooms. All right, and give you probably shouldn't need long for this, maybe 5 minutes or so. All right, and break out. All right, so looking at, again, looking at the college. Well, if you look at the survey here that was done in the 1950s, you can see that a majority of people looked at, and this is a specific date range, but a majority of people looked at 20 to 25 for men, and even earlier, a year earlier for women by both those extremes. So 80% of men think that men should get married at that age, and 85% of women thought that they should get married at that age. Now, I will say that the age probably was a little earlier than that. We did see skewed results from that because it was acceptable back then. We didn't have things such as education. Most people worked in coal mines or textile factories or something of that nature, or enlisted into the services. Back in the 1950s. So it was important to start families early and get that connection so that children could, because children were really the product of the industrial age, right? So the more children you had, the more productive of a family you could have, and possibly get more help with the fields in terms of farming or whatever. So we saw that sharp that majority of people that thought that younger age for marriage for men and women happened around the 1950s. We saw that sharply decline around the 1970s, where we thought 42% men and 42% women thought men should marry around that age, and right around that for women to marry that age. Okay. Andreas, did you have a comment or question on that?
No, sorry, I forgot to take my hand out. I didn't realize.
Okay. All right. So anyway, I thought that was interesting, and we probably see an even sharper decline, as many of you have indicated. How many of you? How about some of the other groups? What age did you say for marriage for both men and women, or individuals, people, not necessarily men and women?
I know I said based on society, I would agree to the 20 to 25 range, but based off of opinion, I would say late 20s to early 30s.
Okay. Again, looking at the numbers, how about the third group? Who was in the third group? And what did you have for your age, ideal age?
We said that like 25, between 35 as
25 and 35?
Yeah, because like we achieve something, and like as Andrea said, like we are being comfortable with our jobs, everything, but mostly people change their major because they think that it's not right for them, and like they really looking for something real.
Mm-hmm.
And like they really being comfortable around 30, like 20 to 30, and being independent and having connection with people, but it's hard to find the right person.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of like have a couple of experience until around that time.
Okay.
Until 35.
Yeah. And so we're kind of experiencing that as an educator. I see that a lot. I see a lot of students that come in, I would say maybe 20, 30 years ago. And this kind of reflects what we see down here, when most men should settle in a career, right? And again, this is very dated material because we have data like this from 1950s and 1970s. We're seeing women that are stepping out into the career field more and more often. And while they're we haven't yet really caught up with pay. You know, the woman is not making nearly as much as the men are in that same role. So we are seeing a little bit of disparagement in that regards, but still, I mean, men that or people that get settled on a career, we're seeing that happening a little bit later. You know, prior to this, when you stepped out of college, you knew exactly what you're going to do. You usually had the guidance of your parents, or you're following in the footsteps of your caregiver or your parents, and that's not really the case anymore. So as an educator myself, I see all too often, I see people shifting their majors or doing something a little bit differently or going a different direction completely. I have a friend that got her architectural degree and got into the job and decided she didn't like it. So she just decided to stay home with her children and not work. And yeah, the person that she married was able to support them both. But you know, that was an example of, she didn't have to be in that role. She went to school for it and she didn't want to do that. All right, let's look at when let's see, when men has the most responsibility and when women have the most responsibility. So the survey back in 1950s suggested that men right around the age of 40 to 50, 82% of men thought that that was appropriate and that was an appropriate age, and 71% of women agreed with that. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the most responsibility, 79% and 75%. But that sharply declined in the 1970s and for men and women. Why do you think that is?
I think when men really have so much responsibilities when they have kids.
Okay.
Both
Okay.
both women and men, I think the same.
Okay. We are seeing, and we can see that echoed with women too. So women has the most responsibility according to the survey. We have 25 to 40, where men were 35 to 50. What are we seeing in trends like that? What with your groups, what did you say for men having the most responsibility? Andreas, you have your.
Yeah, so basically what we were thinking, right?
Mhm.
So I feel like earlier in like the 1950s, it was more acceptable to start your life like sooner. Like I feel like people were getting married earlier, people were having kids earlier, whereas now things are kind of like delayed. So, like my logic with the person that I was working with today was, okay, let's say you leave college at 23, you settle down by like 25, you get married by 27, because these are the numbers you were like coming up with. Realistically, you'll have your first kid within like a year or two of that.
Right.
So like that puts you like the 28 to 30 range by the time you have your first kid.
Right. Okay. So we're seeing a kind of a delay in, again, that the age group when they're starting out, when they're leaving home. In some of those cases, we're seeing a later start of children even leaving home, their parents' home, much into their 20s and sometimes their 30s, and alarmingly, in some people into their 40s. But we're seeing that level of responsibility expand. The other thing we might be able to attribute this to is life expectancy has increased since the 1950s. You know, we're better with our healthcare. We have a better understanding of how to treat certain what we considered back then to be more basic disorders and diagnosis. So life expectancy is getting a little higher. We're able to have children a little bit later. So we might see, you know, back again, looking at midlife people in their 50s still having children in their homes, which didn't necessarily occur back then. You know, the idea was to have kids young while you could to avoid any health issues and get them out of the house and get them as productive members of society. But we're not necessarily seeing that anymore. We're seeing people being a little bit more patient and taking their time, right? Okay, so I'd love to go through each one of these. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today. Did anybody have any thoughts or anything they wanted to share before we depart today?
I just wanted to say that something that Mary and I were talking about was that these like there shouldn't be like a preferred age range. It should just be up to the individual and their situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. Because we have ideas, it's like our stereotypical grandmother. When we say grandmother, we think of some old lady, silver hair, rocking in a rocking chair, so kind of getting these ages. But I think you're absolutely right. I think if we have expectations that people do things by certain ages, then they might encounter undue stress, or trying to meet those expectations might be difficult for them. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good way to do that. It's not like being potty trained. We have that expectation to be potty trained by middle school. Oh my gosh. By school age. But as far as getting jobs and stuff like that, there might be that pressure to alleviate that if the parents are financially struggling and they need that child to go out in the workforce at 18 or something to help contribute to the household, that might be an expectation that the parents have with that child. But anyway,
I just want to add something. Like when we have like that kind of stereotype ages, and some of people really trying to require those ages for their parents and the other people, and they really being like after then having kids and like getting in the settling down in a family, but it's also they are sacrificing so much ideas and the expectation for their lives, and it can cause like long-term depression for themselves. They
absolutely
hide at the back, but they always had some wish to do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. And yeah, just making sure that there is some good guidance as to if there's no expectation to ever have kids, then that shouldn't be a factor. Parent, I hear that a lot is, when are you going to produce grandbabies for me? And some people might say that to their kids. That could add some undue stress. All right, so we're out of time for today. I'll stick around for a few minutes if anybody has any questions for me or any concerns. But other than that, have a great rest of your day. Stay warm, and I will see all of you back here on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.